Thanks everybody for dialing in. Appreciate that. We had over 100 people that registered for this, and I see folks are still signing in. Thanks for being here, and thanks for all you do for CoreFact throughout the year. Appreciate that. You can see Dr. Linneman on the screen here. For those of you who attended the Philadelphia conference back in 2019, Peter was there, and he's always incredibly insightful, entertaining, and I know he's going to, over the next hour, address questions, but also share his insights into the economic conditions, especially as it relate to commercial real estate. I would also ask all of you just mute yourselves, and towards the end, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself, ask the question, and or put it in the chat box. So Peter, it's all yours.
Thank you. And thank you for having me again, Jonathan. By the way, Jonathan, you'll remember at 19, I exactly predicted the economy would be shut down in March and April of 2020. Remember, that was exactly what I said.
I do.
And I said that after that, what would happen as the economy came back to life, supply would notably lag demand for products, and that would cause inflation. So I'll try to be just as accurate again this time, right? Well, you're very kind to have me. Behind me is about a block from where I am. I took about 2 weeks ago to give you Independence Hall, Independence Park in the fall. It's kind of gorgeous, and the leaves are now gone, but that we won't let that deter us. So let me talk about the economy first, and then to real estate, and then questions and maybe hopefully answers. Main Street versus Wall Street. Most of the time when Main Street's doing pretty well, Wall Street's doing pretty well, and vice versa. We're in a situation where Main Street's doing quite well. What do I mean by Main Street? People who live on their salary, right? They work. They work. School teachers, bus drivers, hospital workers, etc. Real people. Typical person on Main Street's 44 years old. They bought their home about 6 years ago. Their home is up enormously in value. They refinanced their home about 1.5 years ago, and they locked in a 2% interest rate for 30 years. Their wealth is basically at an all-time high. Their cash holdings are at an all-time high. Their debt service is up, but not much, from an all-time low, still way below average. They have a job. We're adding 200 to 300,000 jobs a month still. We lots of job openings. The extent of job capacity in the economy is reflected by, you keep reading these headlines about this tech firm's laying off, or this supposed tech firm. Some of the ones that are tech firms, I don't understand how they're tech firms, to be honest, but be that as it may, that they're laying off a lot of people. But if you look at the economy, net, we still add jobs. And not only do we net add jobs, even the information sector, which is kind of where the big tech companies are captured, they're adding jobs. So yes, people are losing their jobs, but they're finding jobs almost immediately if they want jobs. Especially the high-skilled tech workers, not missing a beat in the high tech side, on the high-skilled side. And if you're not a high-skilled or tech worker, but you're employed by a tech company, fine. The hospitals are desperate to have workers. There's all kinds of companies desperate to have workers. Just look at the job opening data. So you have a job, you have job options, you are, your wage is caught up with inflation. It lagged because the inflation spurt started about 1 year ago, and employers about 1 year ago set wages for 2022 without anticipating the spurt of inflation. and then had to play catch up, but they have caught up by and large. Interestingly, if you're on Main Street, you're actually happy net that interest rates are up. And you go, well, how does that work? And that works because Main Street's main mode of savings is checking accounts, banking accounts, and CDs. And you remember what happened to those when you had a zero interest rate? You got no income on. Well, now you're getting income on them. So especially not the 44-year-olds so much, but the 70-year-olds are real thrilled that the interest rate is up. And as someone who's 71, there's nothing wrong with 70-year-olds being thrilled, right? It's a good thing sometimes. No, but seriously, don't forget that those higher interest rates are being received by people, right? In all, not just being paid, but they're also being received. Main Street has seen mortgage interest rates for single family homes explode, not so much because the interest rate went up. The 10-year treasury is at 3.6, 3.5. That's not so crazy. By the way, in 2019, when it was that rate, they were buying lots of homes, right? So that's not crazy in and of itself, but the spread exploded. And this, I'll come back to that. The spread exploded. And people have done what they always do when interest rates rise fast. On the single family side, they pause. So think of yourself, you're going to buy a home, you have money for a down payment, you want to move there for the school district or a job or a lifestyle change. You're going to do that purchase sometime in the next 6 months. If the interest rate were to fall a lot, you'd say, okay, let's lock it in and do it. If the interest rate goes up a lot, you pause. And say, I'll only do it now if I can find somebody desperate enough to sell that I can get a huge bargain, right? So right now, the only people buying homes and the only people are people who are just bottom feeding, and the only ones selling homes are the ones who have to sell. No, so it's not surprising that if you go from a normal market where buyers and sellers both want to buy and sell to a market where you have indifferent buyers because I can wait and sellers who must sell, that the price goes down. But the price won't stay down because we fundamentally have underproduced single family housing to the tune of about 3.5% of the existing housing stock. And that's why home prices have gone up steadily over the last decade. And it's largely due, as far as I can figure out, to creeping NIMBYism, which is you discourage a project here, you slow down a project there. A project that was going to have 200 homes only gets 180 approved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. None of those are big in 1 year, but if you do it for a decade, it compounds, it really builds up. And so that's what we have going on. We have that a bit going on in the multifamily, though not as extreme. So what's going to happen to people? Well, they're going to wait. Main Street's going to wait. And they're going to hope for the mortgage rate to come down. And if it doesn't, they're still going to buy. But they're not in a massive hurry. Think of someone my age. I don't have to move to Florida this month, do I? Do I really need to buy a home and move this month? How about if I wait? And I can even wait 6 months or 7, but eventually I'm going to move to Florida. I'm not, but I mean, that stereotype is. So, and whether now people say, yeah, but at the high interest rate, they can't afford their home. So it'll seize up the economy. Of course they can afford their home. They may have to come up with a bigger down payment, right? They may turn to their parent or grandparent saying, can you help me out on the down payment? Because if you come up with a bigger down payment, you can reduce your mortgage payment such that it offsets the interest rate increase. You can buy a mid-block home instead of a corner home. You can buy one without all the additions rather than the one with the additions. You buy one without a swimming pool instead of one with a swimming pool. You buy an existing home that the bathrooms and kitchens are fully functional but not so gorgeous instead of one that is gorgeous. You make all those adjustments. That's what real people do in life, is make all sorts of adjustments. The notion that people will just sit and do nothing about buying a home because interest rates up is like saying you're in a traffic jam and none of us will ever step on the accelerator. Of course we will. Things will adjust and they work their way through. We adjust. So Main Street's in pretty good shape. We have shortages. Let's stay on that. We have shortages because thankfully demand recovered faster than supply in most sectors of the economy, not just here, but around the world. Around the world, including countries that did not have monetary expansions. That's important. Countries that did not expand their monetary base much during the pandemic also have inflation. So that says it doesn't sound like it's monetary in its source. If you said the only countries that have inflation were those that expanded the money supply, you'd say, well, it must be monetary. When you realize that basically 5 out of every $6 the Fed put into the system with their monetary expansion still sits in somebody's checking account. When you realize that, you then say, gee, the money went in, but it didn't circulate. It's still sitting in checking accounts. And so it has not been a monetary inflation. Let me give you an example. Remember, by the way, in about May of 2020, May of 2020, we had 23% of the labor force collecting unemployment, right? Let me just remind you. And by the way, oil prices had just turned positive again. That's how big a disruption this was economically. We had negative oil prices and almost a quarter of the labor force was collecting unemployment. All right, we forget. You couldn't shop on the non-grocery side of Walmart. You couldn't go to your favorite mall. This was unprecedented. We've recovered pretty well on the demand side. Real GDP, about 3% higher than pre-pandemic, but it's 2 3/4 years later. Real GDP in a normal 2 3/4 years would be up 5 to 6%. So we're not overheated. We're underheated on the demand side. What we are is really underheated on the supply side. I'll give you a couple of examples. One, we have 1 million more employees in the economy today than we did pre-pandemic. 1 million, almost exactly 1 million more employees than we did pre-pandemic. That sounds good until you realize that over that time period, we added 4 million people. We should have added about 3.5 million jobs. So we're 2.5 million jobs short of where we should be in terms of the labor force. We have a shortage of labor. As you know, we have a shortage of labor. That's why we have all the job openings. We have a shortage for a lot of reasons. We can talk about if you want in the questions, but we do. When you have a shortfall of supply, prices go up. Right? It's that simple. Now I'll give you my simplest, most transparent example. Go back to 2019 and go to an airport and you had a ticket for an airplane. And that ticket price was going up about 2% a year. And that was because the number of seats available was growing at about the same rate as the demand for seats. And therefore, we were getting about a 2% increase. Versus 3 years ago, and I do 3 years ago only to adjust for seasonality. versus 3 years ago, demand is 3% lower for airplanes, air seats. And you know that by TSA clearances, right? So we have 3% fewer TSA clearances, and it differs depending on city and is it international or not international, but 3% fewer. Why do we have inflation big time of airline prices? And that's because seat capacity is down 10 to 15%. Oh, gee, that's why the price is up. And the interesting thing is seat capacity is way up versus a year ago, and demand's way up versus a year ago, but demand has grown faster than supply, even though it is not back to where it was. So we have underheated demand, and we have even more underheated supply. So what we need, what Main Street needs, are policies what policies would attack inflation? Well, it's not monetary. If you think about it, if we had the same number of demand, same number of TSA clearances, and the same number of seats, and seat prices were rising at 10% a year, that's monetary. That's a supply-demand balance with a lot of money chasing it. But that's not what we have. We don't need policies that are discouraging demand. We need policies that are encouraging supply. And you can come up with a million of them. I'm just kind of going to suggest a couple. If you have a labor shortage, are you encouraging people to come back to work when you talk about canceling their student loans? Now, I'm not saying you're telling everybody not to come back to work, but you've made it easier for them not to work if they currently aren't working, if you forgive their student loans, or if you defer them paying their student loans. And you can go to any number of other policies. So the policies we should have been adopting probably are policies like a tax credit for going to work, a 1-year tax credit for taking a job. Remember, we weren't going to collect any taxes from that person anyway if they don't work. Reinstating interest payments on student loans. Giving tax credits for opening a restaurant, or give tax credits for opening or expanding a business. Give tax credits if they put more seats on the airlines, right? Now, all those things would have to be carefully crafted, but we need supply. We don't need, now, how are higher interest rates going to get us more supply? They're going to get more workers? How's that going to happen? They're going to give us more seats? How's that going to happen? If that doesn't happen, you're not going to attack inflation. The Fed will say, what we're doing is trying to slow down an already underheated demand and let supply catch up. I got a better idea. Why don't we let demand alone and encourage supply so it catches up? So the biggest danger to the economy is the Fed believes we need 2% more of the people unemployed. We need to get rid of 2% of the people who are working. That's absurd. You have a shortage of labor, and the solution is to create more unemployed people, which, by the way, will go on unemployment benefits. You want to play out how that works? So it's absurd. Can you imagine walking onto the congressional floor as a representative saying, I got a brilliant idea. You want to co-sponsor a bill with me, bipartisan, by the way, that says the way we're going to solve inflation is we're going to pass a law that everybody has to fire 2% of their employees by the end of the month. They call the loony place and have you committed. When the Fed says the same thing, people kind of go, well, it kind of sounds like, yeah, maybe I hear it. And I never understood that course anyway. And so it sounds like they must know what they're doing. They don't. They're well-intended, but they don't know what they're doing. However, that's dangerous. Well-intended, empowered, and wrong-headed is a dangerous thing. So I don't know if any of you watched the recent Netflix, the German production of All Quiet on the Western Front. It's actually a very good production. And it's this famous book about the waning days of World War I. And you had these static trenches, and they were sent over the top to break the stalemate for 3.5 years. And of course, all that happened when they went over the trenches, they got mowed down. And yet the generals searching for the big breakthrough sent them again and again and again and again. And in fact, the German title is much more telling than All Quiet on the Western Front. The German title is Nothing New in the West. And the nothing new was the battle lines didn't change and the slaughter didn't change. They both went on because the generals were well-intended, if you will, and kept sending them to slaughter, even though it was clear that was the wrong decision to anybody who wanted to realistically think about it. But they were so captured by their own thinking. And by the way, they got a lot of young men killed as a result. Well, that's the risk. The Fed can kill our recovery by doing that. If the Fed really is going to do something until we have 2% more not employed, that'll be a disaster. Now, the good news is supply is coming back, even without a lot of encouragement other than high prices. And you are seeing inflation kind of wane. And you hope that that waning and good sense will eventually set in and they don't keep sending boys over to get slaughtered. My guess is the economy does not go into a recession in spite of the Fed's best efforts. And by the way, when the Fed says we need 2% more employment, my approach is let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. I want to see 2% of Fed workers fired before they would propose such a solution for the economy. And when they dismiss 2% of their employees, I'll at least know how deeply they believe it. And that's the equivalent of people saying, General, get out in front and you go over the trench. And when I see you going out in front of the trench, I'll have more faith in your belief in the policies. So I think we scrape by because why? Because we have pent-up demand for single-family homes. We have pent-up demand for automobiles. We have pent-up demand for travel. We have a lot of areas of pent-up demand still because of the shutdown was so extreme. So I think we will get there, but we haven't gotten there yet. Let me switch from Main Street to Wall Street. And the stereotype of Wall Street is short-term assets, short-term money, lots of debt, right? I mean, that's the poster child. If a 44-year-old school teacher in Des Moines who lives on her salary has $18,000 in her 401k plan that and owns her home and locked in 2% is the stereotype of Main Street. The stereotype of Wall Street is short-term assets, short-term money, lots of flip, lots of leverage. The Fed a year ago said, of course, we're not going to keep interest rates at zero forever, but we're in no hurry and we're going to move very slowly, just like we did in the 2010s, where the short-term rate basically stayed at zero for 7 years or 8 years. So they said, we're in no hurry. Now, by the way, I said into 2010s, and I said then they should start raising them now very gradually. Why very gradually? Because people depend on their government to give a balanced view of the playing field. Well, the Fed said that, and then 4 months ago said, oops, we were only kidding, and raised the interest rates from 0 to 4%. It is not the 4% or 3% or 4.2%, or it is the speed at which it moved. And it caught Wall Street unprepared. If they'd have started raising 25 basis points at a time starting in early 2021, we could have been around the same interest rate as we are today and not have Wall Street in disarray, because it's much easier. It's an easier thing to adjust when things move slowly than when it happens fast. How did Wall Street get caught out? Wall Street got caught out, and I'm going to focus on the banks. They make loans, warehouse them, and then cut them up and either syndicate them or securitize them so that they can get the capital back with a profit and fees and do it again and get origination fees and syndication fees and do it again and get origination fees and syndication fees and do it again. As a result of the fast movement of interest rates, their book of loans was below water suddenly, right? Just old-fashioned interest rates up, fixed income value declines. And as a result, even though, and they had done about 10 months of production in the first 8 months of the year. So by the end of August, they had done about 10 months of production vis-a-vis budget. And so it was going to be, they were on track for a real good year for bonuses. Then they looked at it and said, gee, if we now sell this next round of portfolio that's in our warehouse, if we sell that at a loss, it'll wipe out all the profits we made on origination fees and profit on the original turns, and we won't get any bonus. We're not going to get any bonus because those losses will book this year. And if those losses book this year, it'll wipe out my bonus. And they basically said, not to sound too cynical, I've got 10 months of production. I'm going to get 10/12 of my target bonus, which is better than none. I'm going to sit on my hands the rest of the year. I'm going to come up with a new budget for next year that my board and compensation committee will sign on to that budget. And that budget will entail selling loans at losses that are currently in my inventory. So as long as I sell them for the loss I anticipate, and I do that in 2023, I don't affect my bonus. So they're going to sit on their hands. And so banks started sitting on their hands really in September, October, November. As they did, loan to values went way down. The number of lenders went way down. Spreads blew out. Spreads blew out because the only people who were lending were those who could get a rich spread. And the only people who were borrowing were those who were willing and able to pay a rich spread. So Wall Street has sat on its hands, including private equity, because they depend on those lenders. And what you've had is sort of a freeze. And when capital doesn't flow, all my research says anytime capital doesn't flow, cap rates go up. They just do. Doesn't matter why the flow stops. This time it happened to be the movement of short-term interest rates. But the last time it was COVID, and the time before that, it was the default of single-family mortgages. And the time before that was the Russian ruble crisis. And the time before that, it was the S&L crisis. So the cause differs, but every time the capital markets seize, you'll get cap rates up. It's not about interest rates. That was simply the catalyst this time. It wasn't the catalyst in other times. So cap rates went up. And by the way, it's not, the interest rate today at 3.5% is not so crazy on the 10-year. It's the movement of cap rates and the drying up of transactions is simply the spread and the low LTVs and so forth. Now, as banks sell off those loans in the new year, then what's going to have happen is Lending will pick up because they'll recycle that money for fees. And as they do that, lending will pick up and loan to values will pick up and spreads will narrow as you go through 2023. Won't happen in the first month because the first month the board is still tying down bonus targets and budgets. But I think by the middle of next year, you'll see a much more normal looking capital flow. As that happens, you'll see a much more normal cap rate environment. And in fact, we have huge amounts of capital still on the sideline, whether it's dry powder at private equity, whether it's the $4 trillion additional cash that households have, it's the $1 trillion corporations have in additional cash, et cetera. So all of these things are kind of in limbo at the moment on the Wall Street side. Real estate is kind of the intersection. Most of what you're doing is dealing with Main Street tenants. There are exceptions, right? But you tend to deal with Main Street demand, but you do finance yourself a bit with Wall Street, especially construction, where you're using short-term floating money. The thing I would say also about real estate is I know there are a lot of pro formas out there that don't, quote, pencil because of the high debt spreads and the low LTVs. And by the way, the high equity cost at the moment, because the people doing deals want high returns. When good real estate, at least in my career, when good real estate doesn't pencil because of capital market flakiness, chaos, abnormality, do the deal, even though it doesn't pencil, and hold on to it. You say, well, how do I do the deal? I can't borrow the money. Get equity, find equity, do equity. And I wish I'd have had the money to do equity in 1975. I wish I'd had it in 1981, 82. I wish I'd have had it in 91, 92, 93. I wish I'd have had it right after the Russian ruble crisis. I wish I'd have had it right after 9/11. I definitely wish I had it after the financial crisis. Use more equity. And the reason the deals tend to turn out quite well is three phenomena. First of all, those who don't have access to equity, there's a project that didn't get developed. There's a bidder who didn't enter into the bidding for the property if it was an existing. Second is that that capital markets adjust, spreads normalize over time. That's why they're called normal spreads, right? They're called normal spreads for a reason. They normalize. LTVs normalize over time. That's why they're called normal LTVs. And as that occurs, the math that made it marginal disappears. And in fact, you realize I didn't have expensive capital for 10 years. I had it for 18 months. And I've got a deal that, yes, it was a little heavy the first 18 or 24 months. Absolutely, it was a little heavy. But the reduction in supply and the reduction in bidders kind of more than offset that over time. And you're in the game to catch the opportunity of a market that is really overheated on the capital market sometime. So where are you at on the real estate side? Industrial, still pretty good shape. Supply demand, multifamily from a supply demand point of view in pretty good shape. Rents are retrenching a little bit, particularly at people who use rent software, rent maximization software. The reason for that, I've done a lot of statistics in my life, not on that one, but the surge in demand for multifamily that happened between December of 2020 and probably about March 22 was way beyond the data in terms of how much demand increased over such a short period of time. You don't normally get that big a supply demand imbalance. And we had about a 2.5% supply demand in excess of supply versus normal surge. That surge from December 2020 to about March or April of this year occurred because people that had roommates at the start of the pandemic. That roommate could be a parent, that roommate could be a third-party roommate. It worked as long as we worked in the day and partied all night. We worked in the day, partied all night. Well, COVID happened, and either I didn't have a job anymore, or they didn't have a job anymore, or if I did, I had to work at home. And by the way, I couldn't party all night. Well, if I can't work all day and party all night in peace, I'm out of here. And by December of 2020, people started moving out of roommates, particularly parents, but not just parents. And you saw this surge. By the way, the surge occurred everywhere. I have a 208 unit project in New Philadelphia, Ohio. It happened there. It happened in New York. It happened in Boston. It happened in Philadelphia. Happened everywhere. And that's because of this roommate phenomenon. I include parents of the roommate. That's over. The software over extrapolated how much you should raise rents given that demand increase, because it didn't normally see that kind of quick demand increase. And I wrote about 2 issues ago of Linneman letter, you're going to see a dampening of rents, not because of demand, but because of the algorithms and the software overshot. You know, we kind of became captive of our software. Interestingly, and this is anecdotal rather than statistical, interestingly, as I talk to people who never use revenue maximizing software, they aren't retrenching on rents. The ones who used a lot of the revenue maximizing software are the ones where you're seeing rents retrench, but they're retrenching from over pushed levels, if you will, given the fundamental demand. It was a statistical anomaly. Retail, if you have good retail, it's doing well. If you have bad retail, good luck. But that's always been the case. Office is a fundamental question. Office is the fundamental question of who's the boss of me. I assume some of you out there babysat your siblings or were babysat by your siblings, and about 3 minutes after your parent left, it was, you're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me. Well, it's interesting that workers are much more back to work in Tokyo, where everybody knows who's the boss of whom. In Mexico City, where everybody knows who's the boss of who. In Southern California, not so much, because our culture has been very much more, I'm the boss of me. I'm the boss of me. And I'm not taking just Southern California, I'm taking it as the extremum. But the United States culture is much more, I'm the boss of me, instead of you're the boss of me. Places that are you're the boss of me are back. Places that I'm the boss of me are holding out. I believe they still come back for 2 reasons, but it's going slower than I thought. But I believe they come back for 2 reasons. First, once you get, 70% of the people there, I got to go just to make sure they're not talking about me. Right? Just to protect my political flanks, I got to go. If nobody's there, I don't have to go to protect myself politically. But if most of them are there, it's, I often joke when somebody can't make something, one of our friends can't make something, like I go for a walk and one of my friends can't make it, but 2 can, and I go, oh, good, thank you. We have somebody to talk about now, right? That's kind of the way society works. So that's one reason. And the other reason is it's just more productive. It's just more productive. And most of the research shows, basically all the research shows most of the time, most of the people are more productive in the office than not. That's not to say all of the workers all of the time. but most of the workers, most of the time, are more productive in the office. And I believe that dominates. I guess there's one final reason. I believe in the golden rule. And the golden rule is them with the gold make the rules. And ultimately, I think that will prevail. So office is lagging, especially in the US, and especially, it's interesting, more in the red states than in the blue. Texas has got much higher comeback. Florida has much higher back to work than Philadelphia and Boston and New York and San Francisco and LA. They're all coming back though. They're coming back at least to some degree. So let me pause there. Is that a good place to stop, Jonathan?
Good spot. You ready for questions?
Well, I'm ready for questions. I don't know if they're ready for answers.
Anybody? We've still got some time here.
Yeah, I had a question. You talked about the, I mean, obviously the Fed has a limited tool chest. You know, they have a hammer, so every problem's got to be a nail. But on the unemployment in particular, you talked about them throwing 2% of people out of work. Do you really think that unemployment's going to change that much? Or do you think that that 2% is going to shift industries and it's going to be some sort of changing others? With all the job openings, aren't they going to be able to find work somewhere else? Is it just going to be a realignment of industries to go where the supply needs to be beefed up, like get people out of the mortgage industry or the housing industry and into something else? Do you have a thought on that? I think you froze up.
I think Peter is frozen. Unless he's giving a lot of thought to it, Greg.
I'm going to go with frozen.
Okay.
So,
All
great question. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right. But you can hear me all right, or am I the one breaking up?
No, you're good now.
Okay, good. All right. So it's a great question. When I said I think we get by, people call it a soft landing. It's not a soft landing. We don't need to land. I mean, what the hell are we landing for? We're still behind where we should be. We haven't even got travel and tourism back to where it should be. We haven't bought automobiles like we should be. These are all just simple math exercises to know that. So we don't need a landing at all, right? And I think the spirit that you're describing of we've got enough things happening that try as they might, they're not going to land the plane, right? Try as they might, we're not going to land the plane. We've just got too many good things happening. We got too much capacity, too much pent-up demand. And some of it is what you're saying is that at the margin, new workers come in and they don't go to be, you know, some of the employees, if you look at the tech companies, it would appear that things like hiring a whole bunch of people over the last 2 years to work on driverless cars or the Meta or whatever, you can pick a whole bunch of examples, weren't terribly productive for the economy. They were jobs, they were paid, but they weren't really net all that productive with hindsight. I'm not saying they thought they would be unproductive with foresight, but with hindsight, they weren't that productive. And transitioning those people into other areas, like being a TSA worker, just to take a silly example, or working at a hospital to speed the throughput at hospitals, et cetera, that kind of reallocation will probably help the economy.
I have a
Thank you.
question.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that deals turn out well for 3 reasons. One of them was that basically it's eliminating some of your competition because another project hadn't completed. Secondly, that the LTVs and the market interest will normalize, putting them in a better position later. I want to make sure I understood those correctly, and I missed the third reason.
I think I said 3, but I meant 2.
Okay.
So I don't think you missed anything.
Okay.
But to do it, and I think you got it, it's easy to say that, but you need equity to make it happen. And you need courage as well as equity to make it happen, right? It's so it's not like it's trivial to do. There are a lot of, when I used to play, I played basketball one time against a guy who was about 1 week out of the NBA. And I was a good rec league player, but I wasn't, I didn't belong in the NBA. And the guy was 3 inches bigger than me and 15 years younger than me. And, you get the impression. He was not a star in the NBA, but he actually collected a paycheck for a number of years in the NBA. And people would say to me, all you have to do to stop him, all you have to do is, and you're going like, well, I understand that intellectually. It's not the intellectual. I don't have the heft. The guy outweighs me by 20 pounds and he's 3 inches taller and he's got talent. Yeah, I get it. And it's sort of the same here. You have to have equity and you have to have the courage.
Peter, I got a question on the office world. As tenants' leases come up, many of them are shrinking, and therefore vacancies are going up, and there are not a lot of tenants to refill those vacancies, not a lot of companies growing. Buildings are going to get, do you agree that buildings are going to get into positions where they have high vacancies? They're going to face defaults on their mortgages. And then when we go out as brokers and bring our tenants to the building, we may be bringing them to a building that can't afford to build out their space, give them the free rent, run the building, pay the taxes, so on and so forth. And that's going to ripple through the markets.
Yep. I think your approach, I think you hit it dead on. And an office, just to state the obvious, if you took out let's just say a 5 to 7 year loan 5 to 7 years ago on multifamily, you're good right now, right? I don't care what the interest rate is. You can refi. Same with industrial. Same with good retail. Not bad retail, right? But good retail, that's true. Good office, that may not be true of, right? That's what you're pointing out, is that even good office is challenged because the values are probably down. Rents are not notably up. The loan as it comes due, the landlord's not going to put much money in because of the uncertainty of it, right? And so you have to want to back toward, it could be the abilities, I think, with the better, which would tend to be either deep families, right? Or REITs, and the REIT will have better capacity to deal with versus the, what would I call it, the more one-off entrepreneurial owner, right? And so you may hear construction going on in the building just started somewhere. If you hear it, it's not my dentist. But I think you hit it, which is, as you're guiding people, you've got to consider the building and their owner's capacity to continue to do the right things.
I have a question, Dr. Linneman. Mike Feuerman with Berger Commercial Realty in South Florida. You mentioned that it's not just the demand that needs to be addressed, but supply needs to be addressed to combat inflation. The Fed seems to only have tools to combat demand. Their monetary policy makes money more expensive, so people can't spend as much as quickly. It seems like the executive branch has all the tools to address supply, to make the supply chain bottlenecks go away, to encourage construction onshore, of chips that go into the automobiles that, you know, we can't seem to get and things of that nature. What's being done? I mean, is everyone just looking to the Fed and holding their breath, or is anyone else doing anything to free up supply?
Yeah, I think we're frozen again.
So I think your point is a very good one. It's not just the executive branch, obviously, it's the executive and legislative branch that could
Right.
each in their own way. And but that, and I totally agree. And I'm not a complete idiot. I understand the legislative branch doing things is a challenge. And I understand the executive branch is reacting to a lot of political pressures. And let me just give you a simple one. That's pretty obvious. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. It's pretty obvious that the president has a lot of pressure from the branch of his party to try to do green. And yet at the same time, he's got a lot of pressure to encourage oil production, right? I don't think that's a political statement. I think that's kind of an obvious reality, given the trips to Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, which were not high on his list generally, right? So the president is very challenged. So at a time when you would, from a supply point of view, forget politics, not political, you'd say, we need more oil, we need more natural gas, we should be maybe a temporary tax moratorium or reduced tax on natural gas, or if you explore, there's an by the way, in our history, we've done that, right? Not just under Republicans, that's not politically tenable. Deal with increasing supply by going to Venezuela. Now, who do you think is going to do more environmental damage with their exploration? Venezuela or US producers in the Permian? That's not a hard, I don't think that's a hard question to answer, right? And yet, the political realities say, I want to increase supply, but I can't do it in the obvious way for political reasons. That is all over the place, right? We should be encouraging oil production. We are encouraging oil production by other countries, but not us. Like, that's kind of an oddity. And you can find a lot of others in that regard. I take the student loan example. You know, we should be putting pressure on people to work. And at the same time, for other political reasons, right? And I understand we live in a political world, but for campaign promise or whatever you want to call it reasons, we're going to forgive student loans. Put aside the constitutionality. I'm not trying to opine on that. I'm just on the economic incentive. Give their student loans, they have less incentive to work. And so you have a whole lot of administrative, I think, have performed quite badly on this front. But I don't see them changing a lot. But that does not mean that the Fed doing stupid things makes it better.
Peter, there was one question that was in the chat, and it said, you mentioned labor shortage early on. What are the most important factors in your view on the labor shortage? Is it regional?
Well, there is some regionality to it, though having said that, it is remarkable how widespread it is. I mean, it's, you could pretty much go to any hospital or any notable hospital. I don't mean just research hospitals, right? Just kind of go across the country, drive across the country, grow into a town of 20 to 100,000 people, they'll have a shortage of hospital workers, by and large. Not so much doctors, but hospital workers. They have some shortage of doctors. It's pretty widespread. There are regions like Florida, Texas, where the growth is faster. The shortfalls are greater. There's been no doubt. But it's pretty widespread.
We are pushing up right on an hour. Is there one final question from anybody? This session is being recorded, so we will share it with everybody who's on. So if you feel like listening through it again, you can. Anybody else? Well, that sounds like a wrap. Doctor, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Hopefully everybody have a safe and happy holiday. And I always say, remember you're more fortunate than most, and try to do something nice for somebody less fortunate during this time of year. So have a great holiday, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.